they need?
In shorter events, I don't think so. I think the thing that you need to be able to do is expose them to more of that mechanical stress. And usually what happens is they get to a point where they can't tolerate any more of it, and they'll either break or get some sort of soft tissue injury. So that becomes the limiting factor. And that, I think we've spoken about this, that changes individual to individual. And like when I say drugs, I'm not saying that to be a smart ass. It's actually really clear if you look at, say, a lot of the programs of, say, the Soviets during the 50s, 60s and 70s, especially if you look at a lot of their jump programs. So there's some really cool videos if you're interested, like looking at Soviet jump training, and there's heaps of plyometrics on there. And the reason they got away with that is because they were taking anabolic steroids and other sort of factors to maintain that. And now a lot of people have tried to, you've seen over periods of time, people try to implement that amount of mechanical stimulus, and they actually just cannot tolerate it. They get stress fractures, they get tendon injuries or overload problems, and then they end up not being, their joints end up becoming really degraded. And the reason, however, what you found was if you can tolerate that, and you can increase the amount of mechanical loading that you can go through, your performance goes through the roof. And that's why, you know, we saw periods where, especially with the Soviets, their jumping programs were so extensively good for a really long time.
So how do you try and increase the amount of mechanical loading your athletes can tolerate?
Well, it's an interesting game because it seems like as time goes on, athletes that start out seem to be less and less tolerant of mechanical loads, which I don't know. I was talking even to, do you know Mark Stewart? The pole vault coach? I was talking to him about this because obviously he's much older than me and has much more experience coaching people across periods of time. And I said to him, have you noticed that the amount of loading that your athletes can tolerate as they come into your program is less than the past? He said, yes. He said, but the trick to that is starting them early. You know, and I think that's one of the errors that, not errors, it's one of the things that I think is limiting me at the moment is that I tend to only coach adults, right? And that's on purpose for lots of different reasons. But I think ultimately, if I'm going to be able to have success, I probably need to consider starting with 13, 14-year-olds where you start them at a very low level with some of this mechanical load and increase that over time.
So during that like really highly adaptable phase, they actually tolerate ground reaction forces more and more.
You know, you deal with all of my athletes on a day-to-day basis because you're part of our team in terms of, you know, the healthcare side of it. And as you can see, there's such a vast difference in how much mechanical loading some of them can take.
Massive.
You know, like even if you take, you know, my wife Kendra, she can tolerate way more mechanical loading than some of the athletes that I have that I've only been with the last couple of years because the coaches that she had when she was 12 to 16 actually did a pretty good job of exposing her to a lot. Now at the time you're probably like that was a lot of training and maybe there were dangerous and deleterious effects of that. But you know, like completely touch wood. You know, she's 33 years old. She made her first games in the Olympics, her first ever international team at 31. Was running personal bests. She ran personal best 2 weeks out from the games. She doesn't have any joint injuries. She's had a few issues over the years with like tendon injuries and like overuse type stuff. But right now, like there's nothing physically in any way that limits her training, right? And I think that, you know, both of us have to be very grateful to the coaches that she had in the past that actually exposed her to quite a reasonable stimulus of mechanical loading, right? And those are features that I think if you do slowly and you do them early, we have that adaptability as, you know, a complex biological system.
Actually, speaking of which then, John, just going back to your question, have you found anything or do you know of any of coaches using any other type of training stimulus to build maximal speed, you know, apart from actually being on the track? Is there anything that really has translation, do you think?
No.
Yeah.
Well, no, I don't think so. I think, and you know, this comes back to exercise classification and everyone, I think we've spoken about this heaps of times, but the person I think that's documented this the best is Bondarchuk, you know, and he's got his books. Some of them are translated pretty poorly. If you want to look at some of the stuff, Derek Everly's done a really good job along with the guys at Hammer Media have done a really good job of kind of translating Bondarchuk's work. But essentially, I don't know if you've seen it, I think, and the images I think from physiologist from the UK named Tom Crick that they did during the period where they were getting ready for the 2020 Olympics. But it's a triangle with like competitive exercise, special development exercises, special preparatory exercises, and then general exercises. And you categorize your exercises based on that. And that was all based on Bondarchuk's research, where he
took me through some of that.
He did surveys actually of thousands of Soviet athletes, trying to look at correlations between their level of performance and, say, task. We spoke about this before of like what transfers and what doesn't. You know, and it's really interesting because even, you know, his sport was hammer throw, and he coached 3 consecutive hammer throw gold medalists, drugs or not drugs. He still sort of he coached, you know, Yuri Sadiq, who is still the whole world record holder for the hammer.